Hello, and thank you for joining me today for today's panel discussion on media diversity as part of De Montfort University's series of events for Black History Month. I'm Govinda Roja-Lasidhu. I'm an Associate Professor in Journalism here at De Montfort University. And we're going to discuss a topic that's really close to my heart, diversity or the lack of diversity in the media industries. So last week, Ofcom, the media regulator, described the promotion of staff from diverse backgrounds into senior management roles as being woeful. Ofcom have been reviewing diversity data across radio and TV sectors for 5 years now, and it notes that while some efforts and successes have been made in trying to make a workforce that is representative of the country and the people who live in this country, at the junior and entry levels, that's been working, but the sector hasn't been achieving this in the senior level. This means that people who decide what kind of TV programmes are being made and what kind of content that appears on radio are still not indicative of the social composition of this country. And whilst the numbers of minority ethnic staff being recruited is growing, there are different experiences for people depending upon their particular ethnic group and if they work in radio, TV or the press. Quite shockingly, the number of Black journalists in the UK is still very low. Figures from 2016 suggest it's approximately 0.2% of journalists are from a Black background. The number of Black senior management employees is also exceptionally low. So I want to discuss and explore some of these issues, and I'm delighted to introduce an amazing all-female panel featuring former De Montfort University graduates who now all work in the media industries. So first up, I have Aminata Kamara, who's a presenter at BBC Radio Leicester. Have Helen Cockle, who's a diversity and inclusion communications lead for the British Psychological Society, and 2021 graduate Kime C.M. Blake, who's a community reporter for Nottinghamshire Live. So thank you, ladies, for joining me today for this really important conversation. But I wanted to start off, first of all, to kind of understand and learn about yourselves and learn about your journey from De Montfort University into your media roles. Was it straightforward? So can I come to you, Helen, first, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. I left De Montfort University what seems like a very long time ago now. I actually did a degree in performing arts, so that was my starting point. And I left, and I was acting for a while. I was just sort of doing some paid work, traveling around the country, doing some performance work. I did schools, I did a few sort of small theatres and things like that. But I wouldn't really say that that's what got me into the media. That was interesting, and I had lots of different experiences, but I got involved in community work. So I really got involved in working for the voluntary sector. I did quite a lot of stuff in the early 90s around HIV and AIDS. I did a project working with sex workers where we set up a big project for them, so that because they were getting blamed for a lot of the stuff that was going on around HIV and AIDS. This was before people had the drugs to cure it. And I did a lot of stuff around substance misuse and all of these things that I got involved in. And that's what led me into the media, surprisingly enough. I don't know. Do you want me to say a little bit more about that?
Did you find it quite straightforward to then join into the media and participate and get roles?
Well, I don't. So yeah, I did. I mean, in a way, I'd worked. I think what the media really needs are people that can bring the communities closer to the BBC, for example. That's who I worked for. So they need people that can bring the communities closer, that can get those contacts that they haven't normally got, because as you've just said, there are very few Black or people of colour in the media. So they don't have those connections, they haven't got those voices, and they haven't got those stories. So for me, getting into the media, I really traded on my experience. I traded on the fact that I did have all of those contacts, that I could bring all of those stories and all of those hidden voices and those marginalised and underrepresented groups forward. And it was back in the days of good old Greg Dyke. Do you remember him?
Yes, I do actually. I worked under him many years ago.
Yeah, fantastic man. I loved Greg Dyke. He was brilliant. And he wanted to bring the BBC closer to communities. So that's how I got in. And funnily enough, Kamei, I did a story about Nottingham to get in. Yeah, I did a story about Nottingham, and that's how I got through the door. And then I sort of stayed in the BBC full time for about 4 years, progressing from being a community affairs journalist. I was community affairs journalist, and then I went on and sort of carried on through to sort of presenting and producing, and finally ending up in London for my sins. So yes, yeah, it was an interesting journey.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Helen. So I'm going to come to you, Kamei, because we've obviously had that Nottingham connection and you work as a community reporter in Nottingham. What's your journey been like from DMU into the workplace?
Well, I must say it was very, very quick. So I graduated, finished uni in May. I started working as a community reporter on the 16th of August, and I literally got this job because I sent in my CV. So I said, I've just finished uni, here's my CV. They said, do you want some unpaid trial shifts? I said, okay, like, yes, it's unpaid. I'll still do it though. You know, you've got to get your foot in the door somehow. I applied for news reporter, didn't get it. And they said, do you know what? We think you'll be a great community reporter. The job goes live soon. We'll send it to you, which they did. And I got the job. So I was quite surprised. And I know that it's not that easy for everybody. I know so many people on my course who are looking for jobs currently and aren't, you know, getting any luck. But I'm surprised at how straightforward it is. Well, it was for me, because I know that that's not everybody's experience. So I'm really, really lucky in the sense of I sent my CV and I basically got a job.
That's amazing, though. And I think it's really inspiring because, as you said, you've only just finished university.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the fact that you've finished and now you're working, that's inspiring for everybody else that you went to university with. And hopefully, you know, other people as well will follow suit and get into good roles as well. So thank you.
It's possible. It is possible.
Yeah, no, definitely. Aminata, can you tell us about your journey from De Montfort University into your positions in the media?
Sure. So I graduated from DMU in 2013. I did an undergrad and a postgrad in drama. So I actually wanted to go into acting. I applied for drama school, didn't get in. So I decided to go down the university route. But when I was at uni, I think I developed a little bit of a love for the research, finding out about, you know, the different aspects of theatre and performance. So I got really interested in real life stories and telling stories about people. So I was going out into the community, interviewing people, and I was then using those interviews to formulate plays. I didn't really have an intention of getting into media or radio. When I finished uni and I was doing my performance work, I ended up going back to DMU and working. So I was doing admin in a number of different departments at DMU, which was great because it was nice to kind of just be in that space, but from a different perspective. And then kind of went traveling for a little bit, came back, had a baby, life happened, all of this stuff. And it was really random, actually. So just over 2 years ago, someone sent me an advert and said, Radio Leicester are looking for a brand new presenter. They've got a new show presenting. They want to cater to a younger Black audience. I found out about this like the day before, and I'd been on Radio Leicester a few times as a guest. They'd called me on to come and speak and do different things because I was quite active in Leicester, doing community work, doing my theatre productions. You know, people would call on me to talk about certain things. But I had no background in radio journalism, nothing like that, never done presenting. But yeah, I went to the audition, had to do like a blind audition, got through that stage. Then there were like a number of other stages where you had to write, you know, if you got the show, what would your show look like? What would you want to talk about? Who were the kind of guests you'd get on? So I created like this document and put all my ideas together. And then the next stage after that was a 20-minute live radio show. So I would put my ideas into practice. Did that. There was quite a few people that applied. At the end of all the different stages, I ended up winning the competition.
Wow.
and then got the job. So
that actually sounds like the most difficult job process in the universe, if I'm honest.
Literally, and I think what was good about it is that, or I don't know if it was good or bad, I don't know, but I didn't submit a CV. They didn't know my history. They didn't know anything about me. It was only when I got the job and like I met with my manager and she was like, so tell me about you. And I said, well, years ago, I used to go out and interview people because I cared about real people and their stories and giving people in the community the opportunity to have their voices heard on a larger platform. So it's kind of a really weird, random way how, you know, what I've always loved doing, which is amplifying unheard voices, is exactly what I now do on the radio. So yeah, that's how I got into what I do now.
That's amazing. I think what I really have enjoyed is just the diversity in your 3 different experiences of how you've all got there, because it's varied so much. But there is a really common thread what all 3 of you have spoken about. You've all spoken about sort of this idea of amplifying the community, knowing the community, and sharing their stories. So when there's this emphasis, and there's obviously been this huge emphasis on diversity in the workplace, not just in the media industries, just in all places, why do you think it's important that in the media that we're hiring people who are able to relate to different communities in order to become a representative employer?
I think for me, and I think that was one of the reasons why I was brought into Radio Leicester, is because I come from a specific background. So my family's from Sierra Leone. I'm African, West African. I'm probably more well connected to the Black community than anyone else who's currently in the team. And it's important that, especially for the BBC anyway, where, you know, publicly funded, it has to be representative of the voices in the community. And who would be better, who is more closer to that community, has connections with that community, understands the conversations that are happening. Some of the stuff I talk about on my show are issues that I faced, my family's faced, my friends have faced. And it's important that that comes from an authentic place as opposed to it coming from the outside looking in. So it gives a variety of perspectives, I think, in a real, tangible and honest way.
Yeah, thank you. Did anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think for me it's important because, like, I'm an arser. I come from, my family comes from Jamaica. My mum was born here and everything, but we have, you know, close connections with Jamaica, family in Jamaica. I was raised by a single parent Black mother. I understand a lot of the issues going on in the community. So, and not just kind of Black issues, but when it comes to kind of poverty, when it comes to like things like the universal credit uplift being taken away and what that means for certain families, I think it's just so important to have someone who understands that. Obviously, the whole newsroom should understand it to an extent, but there are people who are obviously going to understand it just that little bit more. So I think that it's really important to be able to connect with people. And I'm a community reporter, so compared to other news reporters, I can actually sit down for longer periods of time and have conversations with these people. And it's so important for them to know that there are people in the newsroom that can sit down with them for a long time, understand them, know their background, have conversations and ask questions, and know that it's going to be put up in, you know, I don't know how to explain it, but it's going to be put up in the way that they want it to be published and presented to other people, so they really understand. And I think that's my thing. So
they obviously must really trust you as well, because they're spending that time with you, to trust you that you won't misrepresent their story or their voice as well. Mm-hmm. How do you have to sometimes convince them, or are they happy to trust you?
Yes, I mean, sometimes people are like, oh gosh, it's a journalist. So you have to kind of have to build relationships with people in the community. Like in Nottingham, I've done a lot of work with community centres and kept in contact with them. So if I ever did need case studies, I know to come to I can go to them and they know me. They know that I'm not just kind of like a tooting journalist that just wants to put the story out and then go. I will always be back. So I think that is like the main thing. So it's been good building relationships with people, but it can be hard sometimes, but it's just getting people to trust you and knowing that, you know, you can ring me and keep me updated on how it's going and things like that, knowing that, you know, we do care, and that we will try and help in the best way possible and get the news article out at the same time.
Brilliant,
That's
thank
the
you.
heart of true journalism, isn't it? Is actually building those relationships, engendering that trust. And I think that, you know, you were saying, Govinda, that we've all got something in common. We've also got that aspect in common that, you know, we're all connected to the community in whatever way, and the intersect between, like, it could be, I'm a single mother as well, but, you know, single mothers or poverty, or you know, you might have a connect between sexuality. There are lots of connects and intersects that actually allows us, I think, as Black women to really relate well to communities at large, which I think gives us a bit of insight, you know. And I think that that's what the BBC and other kind of media outlets, you know, like your paper, Kmei, that are looking for, is that insight, that connection, and also that sort of understanding. And I think that that's a real unique gift that we can bring, and that's certainly a unique gift that I brought when I was working at the BBC. And I was just listening to Aminata, what you were saying about, you know, be able to talk about your community on the radio. I remember when we had, is Pinesh Dankwa still there? He produced a program called Sounds of Africa many years ago, and it bridged two communities in Leicester. So it bridged the Somali community and the Ugandan community. And that was a massive piece of social, you know, social work, if you like, that was achieved through the media. So there's lots and lots of ways in which our influence is so important.
So do you feel that, because what you've all sort of alluded to is this idea of localness as well, you know, local radio, the local newspaper, is it almost easier to connect with communities and articulate those communities through local and regional media, as opposed to what we're seeing in the national? So when I say national, I mean like the press, the main BBC or Channel 5, Channel 4. Do you think there's a difference between local and national?
I'd like to say something about that if I can, because I worked for BBC Radio 5 Live on their breakfast show. So obviously that's a national programme. And I came from working locally in community. And the difference for me, I think, is that at a local level, you can be an investigative journalist. So you can go, you can get those stories, you can build those relationships, like can make it going back and saying, listen, we do care. What happened? What happened to your son? What happened to your daughter? How do you feel now? Just checking in. You can build all of those relationships and people are likely to come to you. Whereas when you go to a national level, everything is a little bit more diluted. And you end up, so I spent all my time out talking to people. Then when I went to London, I spent all my time behind a desk. Now put me behind a desk and I'm like a caged bird. I'm like, I know, let me out. And that sort of hampered my gift that I was able to bring. So I think it would be a real benefit for a public service like the BBC or a newspaper to take that element of locality through into the national picture. And I think they get a lot more than they do, really.
Yeah, I imagine one of the issues that they face is time constraints, because I have heard other people say similar things, that when you get to a certain level in journalism, as opposed to that dream I think people have that journalists are out and about and in the communities, you know, down the pub or at events, that actually you're very much desk bound, you know, filing for the next deadline or the next TV program that you're working on. So there is that sense of isolation, because if you're in a desk in an office, you're not connecting with the communities that you're trying to speak to, are you?
No, that's very true.
So another issue that I've also sort of noticed, I do like, so since diversity has become sort of a bigger thing, I guess it's been building up over the last sort of decade, maybe even 20 years. There appears to be different experiences for people from different groups. So increasingly, it seems like when you turn on a TV programme, that you're more likely to see a female South Asian newsreader than someone from a different ethnic group. And then the figures I related earlier about the low numbers of Black journalists and the low numbers of Black senior management across the sector, there are figures that show that there are South Asian managers in, for example, different parts of TV and radio. Why do you think there are these different types of experiences for people who still come from a different background, but not identical backgrounds? What's causing the differentials?
I'm going to attempt to give an answer. I feel like this is true in every industry. It's not just a media thing. In every sphere, we see the impact disproportionately towards Black communities, and I think that's probably part of a wider conversation when we look at institutional racism, when we look at bias, unconscious bias, whatever you want to call it, access to opportunities. The question really is who's really at the top and who's really making the decisions? Are any of those people like me, look like me? And if they don't look like me, do they understand my journey and my struggle? Is access to information in terms of opportunities, is that information being actively pushed to certain communities? There's also probably the more wider thing, coming from a Black African background. I know I was raised where being creative or doing something like this isn't necessarily the career path that you're pushed towards. It's always doctor, lawyer. We've had these conversations a million of times. That's that, and I know that's not just exclusive to Black communities. I know other communities share a similar thing as well. But when you're coming from a generation where a lot of our, my mum and my family have migrated over here, it's this perception of, you have to do well, you have to succeed. There are all of these pressures where you cannot fail, you cannot make a mistake. The fact that we've come to this country, we need you to be better, to have better than we had. So because of all of those pressures, and when you look at generational wealth and the fact that a lot of us are having to start from scratch. So we probably don't even have the finances or resources to be able to pay for this or that equipment or that. So it's a whole heap of things as to why there is that lack. And it's not just a structural racism thing. I do think it's multifaceted. And I think conversations like this will help to, hopefully move things forward and change it. But I think it's multi-layered.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Helen, you're nodding along there. Did you want to add anything?
I thought that was brilliantly put, Aminata. Yeah. Absolutely spot on. It is, as you say, I won't repeat it, but it is systemic racism. It is institutional racism, but then it's a whole cultural question and issues and background that kind of have historically put Black people off coming forwards. There's definitely something about, and again, in the profession that I'm working in at the moment, kind of advocating for diversity and inclusion, which is psychology, it's recognized that at the top of that profession, there are a lot of white people, a lot of older white people, old white men, and then the women, and then maybe dotted here and there, a few South Asian people, and then very rare, like hen's teeth, and I'm always searching for them, are the Black people. And it's like, well, what is that about? And I think that it's multi-layered. And, we're sitting here as women. What about the Black men? Because I tell you, they're even less visible. So yeah. I've got a little sort of like, I suppose it's a sort of a soapbox thing, which is I really hope that more Black men come forwards to be in the media, because it's so vital that we hear their voices and that they can step into that position of kind of representing not just their community, but representing themselves and bringing that presence forward into the media.
I have to say, we did try to balance this panel, but it was very difficult. Because obviously when we were trying to invite people, you're right, there are some people that are visible in certain roles, but more generally, I'm not sure that there is such a visibility of Black men in media roles. I guess maybe at a lower level, but perhaps not in the middle and moving upward. And there just seems to be an absence.
I was going to say that from what Helen was saying, I think obviously Black men, there's not a lot that are visible. I think that when I think of Black men on radio and things like that, I think of BBC Radio and Extra, which plays a lot of, which is kind of associated with more Black music, grime, hip hop and all of that. So it's moving them from, I mean, they can still stay there, but it's moving them from there on a more national kind of scale to showcase what they can do on Channel 4, on BBC One, on Channel 5 and things like that. So I think that is actually a really important point, that not a lot of Black men are visible and that they need to be, because when we think of things like obviously football, and when all the racism came out, it's all fun and games, everyone else speaking about it, but how amazing would it have been to hear that from a Black journalist, a Black man's perspective? So I think, yeah, it is really important to move them forward and for them to not just have things on BBC One Extra. I mean, here in Nottingham it would be Kemet FM. That's more associated with the Black community. It's getting them dotted all over the place. So that is, I agree with that point massively.
Thank you. That's so interesting. Often when we talk about gender, so if we go back to the fact that you're all female, we talk about the pay gap and that's seen like as a negative thing. Has there been any sort of impact upon the three of you, having the impact of your gender and your ethnic background combined, negative or positive?
How honest can I be?
Honest as you want to be.
I'll give you one specific example. So there was an interview. I don't know if you can name people. There was an interview I did with a politician recently, and the way the conversation, it was a live interview. It was comments he made about Black Lives Matter, and I was asking him about the comments that he made, and the response that I got back. There were a number of people that said to me, if you were not Black and you weren't a woman, there's no way he would have spoken to you that way. And when you're doing live radio and you're in the moment, there's a lot of stuff that I didn't quite take in until after. There was a specific comment that he said, people like you get people like me into something like that. And there were a number of people who commented and like messaged in and stuff and said, well, what did he mean by people like you? Some people saying, well, he's saying people like you because you're Black, people like you as in journalists. And it's just a sense of where clearly there was some PR issues and certain people shouldn't be put live on radio. But it was upon reflection of that, I did think to myself, if I wasn't Black and I wasn't a woman, I definitely wouldn't have, the conversation would have been very, 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 very different. Other than that, I can't really say that I feel like my gender specifically really impacts me. The show that I present is targeted at young Black community. People listen to my show, they know they're going to get conversations around Black culture, Black music. We're going to talk about this stuff. So I guess the racial thing is slightly different. I think what I have found is that when I do present probably other shows, I'm more mindful of my Blackness. I'm mindful of the conversations I bring, my colloquialism, how I present myself, the stuff that I talk about, because I'm aware that maybe my true authentic self might not be palatable to a majority wide audience. That's my like 100% honest perspective.
That's really sad though, isn't it? That you couldn't be your true 100%, because theoretically, when you're hired in the role that you're hired and you work at a radio station, you should be able to bring your whole self and it be acceptable and, in your words, palatable to everybody.
It's a fine line though, because it's almost like, and I have a battle with this in my mind. It's almost like when you're around your family, there's a way that you behave. And then when you're around your friends, there's a different way that behave. But when you're with your work colleagues, so in normal life, we naturally do shift ourselves depending on the space that we're in. So sometimes I battle between, well, how much of it is that and how much of it is dimming down my blackness for a different kind of audience. And I feel like as a I don't know, maybe you guys, Helen and Kamei, you can say as well, but I feel like kind of you kind of have to in this industry, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I'm probably a bit older than everyone, but do you know, I'm so fed up with not taking my true self with me now. I've kind of given up. I just bring my true self wherever I am now. But that is years of practice. I did not do that to start off with. And, you know, I was laughing when you asked that question, Govinda, about has my gender and my ethnicity ever impacted my work in the media? It definitely did. And I'm a bit, I suppose I can be a bit mischievous. So there were elements when I would like to surprise and maybe shock people a little bit, because there's always been this thing that, as you say, we're chameleons. And I think as often as Black women or as people of color, that we are chameleons, because we've learned how to do that. We've learned how to play to the audience, whichever room we're in. So if it's with the doctor, we're like this, and you know, with the researcher or with your friends or whatever, you know, we do change. And I think particularly people from ethnic minorities, we do know how to do that more and more, especially because we're in a white majority. So that is something that is part and parcel of our upbringing from when we were little. But we learned how to play like they did, and we learned how to speak like they did, and we learned what was acceptable, and don't laugh too loudly, and oh, you know, okay, it's a wedding, but you know what, no one's dancing, damn, I better sit down, you know. And like all this stuff that just goes on subliminally that starts to affect you. But I really believe now, in this current climate, that there is an appetite for us to be our true selves. And I think that, you know, I was thinking about this discussion that we were going to have, and about how, like, you do this Black, you know, your show is for the Black community, Aminata, and everything, whereas I was quite mainstream, everything that I did. And so what I was going to say was that now I think we can really bring our true selves and our authentic selves forward a lot more. And I think that it's better than it was. But then there's also the other side of it, which is that some people might just want to do a good job. They might not want to talk about the fact that they're part of the Black community. They might not want to have to speak to Black issues. And actually, it's almost like we all have to be ambassadors now. And I know for sure at 23, I wasn't ready for that. You know, at 53, I am. So, yeah.
That's really interesting, Helen. Thank you. I guess that sort of leads me on to something else that I think happens when, you know, when sort of media organisations are addressing diversity or thinking about having greater inclusion. Is there a risk that when you hire people, that they are sort of being asked to be representative or indicative of a certain group in society, so they end up having to shoulder a lot of responsibility?
I feel like you have to. I think we're at the end of the day. What's her name? June Sarpong came to Leicester about a year ago. She's now, oh God, Someone help me with her job title.
She's the diversity
director at the BBC.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So upon like the start of her role, she came up to Leicester, did a bit of a talk with us, and someone asked that question. One of our South Asian presenters asked her that, well, sometimes, I feel like I've only been hired because of my race, and and she said, well, it is what it is. She goes, and we have to do that. We have to be intentional about targeting certain groups, because if we don't do that, you're not gonna have the diversity that we need. And she said, for many years, white people have been being hired because they're white, or for the fact that they're not Black. We don't get opportunities because of our race. So it shouldn't be a sense of where we should feel like inadequate because I'm only been brought in because of my race. It's a fact that yes, you've been brought in because you're talented, but also you have to do that targeted search. So you have to go into those communities because the talent is there. These people are making YouTube videos. They're doing podcasts. The talent is there. So we need to, even when I did my audition, they did it at Radio 2 Funky. They didn't do it at the BBC because they wanted to do it in a community space, which they know that people probably won't feel intimidated. Young people tend to go there for, different clubs or different activities. They do stuff there. So that was an intentional decision that they made, because probably people might feel too intimidated to go somewhere like the BBC. And because the talent is there, you just need to find it. And anyone who finds themselves in that position and dealing with that sense of imposter syndrome, you have to just move through it. And what I do now is the fact that I'm here, I'm using this space to bring other people in. So I make sure that I'm accessible to my community, because if I don't do that, what's the point there's no point in me being here. No point whatsoever. I'm not making a difference.
That's great. Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Helen?
No, I was just listening. I was listening along there, nodding away. It's okay.
I will say to our audience who are listening at home or anywhere that you are, do feel free to put into our comment box any questions that you have for any of the panelists or for any of us at all as well. That'd be fabulous. So I have got one question actually from Melanie Crofts. She says, what's the one piece of advice would each of you give to aspiring new Black journalists?
Can I go?
Yeah.
I think for me, being new as well, I think it's just to keep on going, because you're going to have points where I've had so many times in this job, not because I'm Black, but because I've just not known what to do. I think it's just to keep going and to keep pushing through, and to, like Aminata said, use your platform to bring other people in. And that's how you know that you're making a difference. Because I think, to my knowledge, I'm the only Black person in my newsroom. I've not actually met everybody yet, but I'm the only Black person. And I would like to think that if I wasn't in the newsroom, work would have showcased loads of things for Black History Month. But that's what I'm doing now. So it's about bringing people in, using what you know, use contacts that you know, and try and get it all showcased out. And that way you will gain trust of people in the community, and people think, wow, I can relate to that. You represent me. Look at what you're bringing on such a local level. I can't wait to see this go national and things like that. So it's just about pushing through, keep on going, use your platform and bring other people in. And no one will have a go at you for doing that. It's the best thing that you probably can do.
That's brilliant. Thank you, May. Aminata or Helen, what would you say?
I'd probably say get in touch with presenters. I feel like people are really accessible. I always say everyone at the BBC is first name dot last name at bbc.co.uk. Simple. Or sometimes you can Google. A lot of the times when I'm looking for guests, I use Google, I use Instagram. The fact that we've got social media now, make the most of that. Get in contact with people and literally just say, hey, I'd really love, this is what I'm trying to do. I'd love to have 15 minutes with you. Can we have a coffee? Can we have a Zoom chat, 15 minutes or whatever? Just do it. And, people and keep getting in contact with people. The other thing I'd say is I've obviously said use your platform, but what I mean by that is create the content that you want to create. Start doing the work, start building a kind of a catalog, whether you want to create a website and put the content up on there, whether you want to do it via your Instagram or YouTube or whatever. I've got friends who I've watched grow from literally a couple of hundred followers all the way to 7K, 10, 12K. And that's happened within a year because they're constantly churning out content. So it's long, it's difficult, but if it's what you want to do, just be dedicated to it and do it. And just do what you love and be consistent with it.
Sorry, I couldn't find my little mouth. Yeah, I mean, I definitely would just echo what's been said already. And just to add to that, something that I read recently that Michaela Cole, you know, from I May Destroy You and Chewing Gum, she said, write what you're most afraid of. I love that. For me, that gives me goosebumps every time I hear it, because it's going back to that. We do have insight. You do have insight and also intersect, you know, between all different kind of things. And actually, there's a lot of stuff that just sits around here. Yeah. Bring it forwards and write about it. You know, like Aminata said, build up your social profile. You know, like Kimay said, you know, approach people, go and talk to people, pitch your ideas. Don't be afraid to pitch your ideas. Yeah. Because actually, they might just have you back as a guest. But actually, then the next time you come back as a guest, you get your name on the BBC system or Channel 4, and it just builds like that. And you'd be surprised. So I suppose the piece of advice that I would give to aspiring new journalists, no matter whether you're, you know, young or old, is what interests you. Talk about it, take it to the places, build your network, use LinkedIn, relate to people, and just keep being a voice. Be a voice, and don't be afraid. Yeah.
And I have a question from Sophie, which I think just ties into something that you just said, Helen. Does age play a factor in securing opportunities in the media? And how easy is it to get into the field the older you get?
That's an interesting question, right? Because I'm planning on re-entry. No, a little bit, maybe tiny re-entry. No, I don't know. I mean, I think age is kind of, it does play a factor. Certainly plays a factor for women, as we know, always has done, kind of always probably will do. Although I think they are trying to change things. I would say that it probably does have, you know, does have a part to play. But if you're good and you have a story, you know, you have something to say, that's no reason why it should stop you. And it doesn't have to be your first career. You know, media wasn't my first career. I hadn't even really considered it. So I think, yeah, I don't think it should stop you if you can just use your voice positively. You know, for me, this is not saying that younger people aren't wise, but for me personally, age has brought wisdom, and it's brought confidence, and it's brought the ability to kind of like that imposter syndrome, which I still have. I can reflect on that now. So actually, I'm a lot better than I think I would have been, than I was. I'm just different, but I definitely, you know, there's definitely stuff that you've got.
And I think to add to that, the media, when they seek people, so like whether they're seeking people to be experts on sport or culture, that kind of thing, they're looking for people who have knowledge. So age is almost an asset in that, because you've built up that sort of expertise over time. So I wouldn't let age hold you back, because I think in that sense, the media is a sector that's quite broad as well. It's not like going into law where, you know, you need to have this degree and that degree and all of those X qualifications before you can even get your foot in the door. I feel like the media sector is more fluid, even though lots of young people do degrees in media and communication or journalism courses with us at DMU. Not having that and your age, I think, should still be okay, because it's almost what you know. I have another question here, which is also kind of related to Helen, something that you just spoke about. Is social media, like, Instagram, etc., helping to bring new faces into journalism and presenting, or is the space becoming oversaturated?
Should I go? Is that okay? I think that it is bringing new faces, and rightfully so. I don't think it's becoming oversaturated. I think it's important. I think that is sometimes how you can find the best people and the best stories. Like at uni, you would always say, use social media. It's a very powerful tool. There was like a social housing crisis in London, and this guy, I think he wrote in, and he did so well. And I think it was Vanessa Feltz who offered him a job on the radio. And if we can bring more opportunities like that by using social media, I think why not? I think has it become oversaturated? Maybe, but I don't know if that's such a bad thing. If we're finding all these people who are good storytellers and who can bring different issues to light through just making a tweet or contacting other journalists to bring opportunities to themselves. And most of the time, they don't even know it will bring opportunities to themselves. They're just trying to bring awareness to things. And that's what journalism's about. So I think that is, I think, yeah, it might be becoming oversaturated, but no, I don't think it's particularly a bad thing.
So what would your tips be to help improve diversity in your workplaces and in the media in general? And for aspiring journalists, so that's two questions, I guess, how could they be more diverse and inclusive in their practice so that when they get to these jobs that they want to get to, they can hit the ground running?
Gosh.
Do you mean how can Black journalists be more inclusive in their practice?
Or everybody, just so that when they go into the media, that they are more aware and more diverse and more inclusive in their storytelling and the kind of issues that they're bringing to the fore.
I mean, one of the things that I was going to sort of take on the back of a previous question is that, remember, the media has got all sorts of people. It's not just about being out front. A producer is as important as a presenter, as a researcher. So there's lots of ways of influencing a story, which can talk a little bit to your question just now. Is look at your story from different angles. Look at your ideas from different angles. Okay, you might just think, okay, this is what I would say, but actually, how would you frame it? How would you frame that story? Like with the radio, I'm not sure so much about print journalism because I'm not really a print journalist, although I've obviously done writing in my comms positions. But how would you frame your story? What voices would you have? You can think visually. There's so many ways that you can kind of polish up your skill set, to then, when you step into that newsroom or whatever aspect of media you want to work in, you've actually created quite a rounded picture. It's just making me laugh, actually. I thought I was looking at a conference brochure the other day. This is just a really ridiculous example. And they were saying, oh, what about the diversity? Well, the only Black person on it was eating a pastry. And I just thought, well, that's really interesting, right? I know. Yeah. And it was like, okay, well, what about that Black person standing behind a lectern giving a lecture? Or what about, so it's about, and that's just a production. I mean, I know it's a lot bigger than production, but, if I'm producing something, you try to think about it in the round, so I would say, when you hit the ground, when you think of going to hit the ground running, try to think about it in all of the spaces that it takes to make a piece of work, and you'll find your strength.
That's really good advice there. Thank you, Helen. Kamay, would you have any advice for how people could be practicing or trying to be more diverse and inclusive in the work that they're doing?
I think kind of maybe push back to the beginning. So have you got enough Black recruiters? If you are a white recruiter, or a white editor, or just someone in the newsroom, do you actually truly understand Black issues? I think that's an important thing. I think it's all about understanding and comprehension, as are most things in life, kind of thing. So I think it's about understanding issues and looking at who's recruiting. I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, you need all black recruiters. It's just about the diversity and knowing why it's important to have black people in your newsroom or on the radio. I think when they start understanding why it needs to be diverse, I think that is, you know, another stepping point to make things more diverse. I think that's really important.
Aminata?
I'd probably say like collaborative working, and just kind of, I guess the beauty, as we've spoken about in local radio, is that you can really embed yourself in the story. And, you know, there can be two reporters working on the same piece. And, you know, I have colleagues who ask me, you know, my white colleagues who ask me questions. And like we have a really, really good relationship where we can, you know, I remember when there was the issue with the Super League. I don't really know much about football, but what I found really interesting about that is that I think it was within 24 hours or 48 hours, the decision to have the Super League was overturned because everyone in the public or community was really outraged, because obviously football means so much to everybody. But what I couldn't understand is that, well, why isn't the same outrage shared towards racism in the game? And so me and my colleagues were able, me and like the sports journalists were able to have this really honest conversation about, well, what does football mean to people? And, you know, I'm saying, but I don't get it, you know, and we were able to, you know, really understand each other and grow together. And I think, and that's why I say collaborative working, having honest conversations, because at the end of the day, as much as I'm a black person, I'm a human being, and I need my colleagues to understand who I am and where I'm coming from, and vice versa. I don't always want to talk about black issues. I might want to talk about other things. So, you know, it's great to just have good relationships with the team and have really authentic relationships, both on air and off air as well.
That's brilliant. Thank you there. Just got a question come in from Gregory Smith. He says, is black ownership of media the way forward to achieving a real platform for black voices?
Yes.
That's a short answer. But
and
like to silo voices.
Sorry, say that again.
But that if you had black ownership of, say, a media outlet, I would worry that it would silo people to saying, well, that's where you should go and this media is for everybody else.
Yes. But if it's a case of like a real, I guess it depends on who it is. I mean, I don't know. I don't really have much of a journalistic or media background, but I think the reason why I say yes to that question is because, you know, your story isn't getting unfiltered. Like, you know what I spoke about earlier in terms of not feeling like I can always be 100% my authentic self. And, you know, sometimes it's just, there's just too much filtering, or there's just too much. Sometimes I think some of what I struggle with, sometimes other people having an opinion on your story. And it's like, well, no, I understand this. I understand what the conversation needs to be. And sometimes you just need the support to just carry that forward. And if you're probably in an all black space, you guys just get it. And I'm definitely pro having, you know, all black spaces, all black teams, all black, because it's, you know, it's healthy. It's, you know, even what Kame was saying earlier about, you know, saying that you think you're the only black person in your newsroom, that's such a weight that you now have to carry the weight of the conversation. You have to represent, you have to get it right. And that takes you away from the story. That's just, to me, it's just a bit of a distraction. And I think that question there, my long and short answer is, I think yes.
Helen, Kame, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, this is such a difficult one for me because, yes, you know, did you watch Black to Front on Channel 4? It was great. Yeah, really great. So that was fantastic. And I think that, so my personal thing is all about bridges. It's all about collaborative working. It's all about coming together. So for me, I think there's a space for Black production and Black ownership, similarly as white ownership. But I don't want to see that silo happen. And I think it probably would. And I'm not sure whether a different sort of filtering might happen if material was coming out. I think we have to work together. And I think that we have to develop really confident white allies, right? Because for me, another issue is that white people are sometimes afraid, right, to have that conversation, Aminata, with you about the football, or like you say, Kime, you know, like in the newsroom, in your thing, like who's doing the interviewing? Who's doing the interviewing? You know, who's reading the applications? Yeah. It needs to be co-production. So that's, I guess, if I had to jump either way, I'm going for co-production.
But I think what you said there about white allies, I think is so key. Even when we look at the movement and the progression of women, it wasn't just women that were, men were standing alongside women and saying, yes, you know, so we do have to have that collaborative working, and, you know, those strong allies who really understand the Black experience, who really care and are committed and are not just not racist, they're actively anti-racist. Those are the allies that can push this forward. So yeah, I agree 100%.
So kind of related to that, final question before we need to wrap up our really interesting conversation is it's from Sophie. She says, do you think the increased interest in the Black experience since Black Lives Matter protests of 2020 will affect and make sustained change in the media?
You would hope so, because if not, then what was all the uproar about? You can't just kind of jump on the bandwagon, and then when it kind of dies down and George Floyd had been dead for 5 years, it kind of stops. It needs to be consistent. So I would hope so, that, because even my mum, she works for HMRC, she's having all this, training for her workplace at the moment about inclusivity and things like that. And it's ever since the Black Lives Matter protests. So you would like to think that, it's sad that, something so horrible has to happen for people to kind of start taking things that seriously and having more conversations. But yeah, I think I can't see the change yet since the Black Lives Matter movement with diversity in the media, but I would like to think that it's happening. So fingers crossed, basically, with that question.
Thank you. Helen or Aminata, did you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, I'll just quickly go and then leave space for Aminata to come in. And I just want to say that I think that things will make a difference if the Black people get into positions of governance, right? So we have to get those right now where there's this massive traction. We have to get Black people into senior leadership positions. We have to get EDI threaded into the kind of strategy, the long-term strategies for organizations. We have to have transparency and accounting, so that they have to keep reporting that this work is still happening, because this has happened before. Yeah, it's happened before. There's been this big wave and then it's died down, and a big wave and it's died down. It has to be sustained. And the only way it's going to be sustained is if there's significant changes at senior level.
Thank you. Aminata?
I think that we have to, this is why, going back to the previous question, is why I think we have to take control of our stories. And that's why I'm kind of probably leading more towards, all Black spaces, because I guess, we still also have people who are, I don't know, seeing Marcus Rashford and thinking that it's Stormzy. We're still seeing these crazy misrepresentations where you see one Black person, you mistake them for something like these, and it's almost like, well, is this deliberate? Or do you genuinely think that so-and-so looks like so-and-so? And sometimes people are just tired of, the disrespect, even when Sideman left the BBC because of, the use of the N-word, it's understandable why certain people are frustrated and outraged, even after the passing of George Floyd, even after the protest, even after the conversations. At the end of the day, people are sick and tired of the disrespect, and people, you know, just want to have their voices heard and want to feel like they are equal members of society because they are. Because you're Black and because of your background doesn't make you any less valuable than anyone else. And I think going forward, I'm only here for people who are on that side of history. What side of history do you want to be on? That's where I want to be. You want to see the positive change. And, you know, to be fair, Black History Month, I'm really looking forward to kind of seeing, you know, the positive conversations that will come out of this, the allies who will be excited to share content, be a part of the conversation, and see, how we can change the future for all of us.
I'm going to stop here on that really positive note, Aminata. Thank you so much. And thank you to all my panelists. You've all been really, really great. It's been such an interesting conversation. This hour has just whizzed by. But if you did enjoy this conversation, please do have a look at the other events that De Montfort University are holding for Black History Month. Check out the website link, and there are numerous different things that you can get involved in. Thank you once again to my panel, and thank you once again to everyone who's listened in to us. Really appreciate your time. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.